right, welcome back, everybody. Thanks for coming back in after lunch. This is the afternoon nap portion of the agenda. We'll let you digest your lunch and we'll see if we can keep you awake moving forward. I'm Craig Reed. I'm the Chief Growth Officer at Serco North America, and I'm also a Senior Fellow at the GovCon Center here at George Mason. And I'm going to be a player coach today. I was originally prepared to be a panelist, but our originally scheduled panelist, Samit Shrivastava, was injured and wasn't able to make it in. So we'll stand in for him, and I'll offer some of my own views along the way as well. And we hope he mends quickly and fast. But today we do have with us Soraya Correa, our Chief Procurement Officer from the Department of Homeland Security, Ben Edson, the founder and Chief Executive of VariQ, barbecue, right?
VariQ.
Yeah, like barbecue. Yeah, and Dolly Oberoi, the founder and CEO of C2 Technology. And so in a couple of minutes, I'm going to ask the three of our panelists here to provide some prepared commentary, and then I'll pose a few questions to them to get the conversation started, and I promise we'll save substantial time for the audience to ask questions. We've actually already got one in. And probably the question we have coming in is, why is Craig Reed up here talking about small business? So I've got 35 years in government contracting, working for companies like Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, DynCorp, Agility, Serco. But in that role, I've brought small businesses onto full and open teams to meet our set-aside requirements as subcontractors. I've seen several significant opportunities that we were going after as a large tier ones that had been converted over to a small business procurement, and have kind of experienced it from that perspective. I've teamed with small businesses on opportunities that have been designated as set aside. Structured over and under relationships to try to play that game figure when we didn't know which way it was going to come out. And so it's really it's a key part of, from a large business perspective as well. I've also bought some recently graduated small businesses and businesses that were working through the last of their small business contracts and trying to integrate them into larger companies. And there's some very unique dynamics about the economics of doing that and the integration process and the transitions of those companies that I think we'll probably get into today. And I've worked for a recently graduated firm like NT Concepts, where I've seen programs we had bid on and won as a small come up for recompete, but we had graduated and could no longer bid on and continue the work that we had been performing on. Again, another key issue and area associated with that perspective from the ecosystem of our larger firms and smaller firms. I've helped structure 2 mentor-protege joint ventures with 2 different companies, and I know we're going to talk about that a little bit as well. It's an area that's definitely growing in terms of popularity, and I'll tip my hand and say that I think a question there is going to be around, is it just a competitive scheme that benefits the larger companies, or is it truly something that provides mentorship that's of value to the small partners that are a part of those? And through my consulting practice over the years, I've consulted for small businesses that were facing what I refer to as the existential challenge, right? Do I sell now, or do I double down and stick in for the long haul? And the kinds of issues that go on that are everything, those are issues that are personality driven. They're personal lifestyle choice decisions, but they're also very much shaped by the procurement landscape that we're operating in. And I've also, last but not least, I've been working for private equity companies looking to help them buy small businesses, and I've looked at many over the years and have an appreciation for the what helps drive valuation from the standpoint of prospective acquirers. So I've observed small businesses from a lot of different perspectives, but not actually from that of being a small business founder and experiencing those advantages and challenges and choices and that they have to face on an ongoing basis. And so we're fortunate to have 2 very successful, started as small founders who've grown very good, successful businesses, and your perspectives are going to be really welcome. And I do think the timing is right, though, to kind of start dissecting exactly, what's been going on with our small business policies and regulations, as these have been kind of growing themes in our community. As a senior research fellow at the GovCon Center, I recently completed a working paper entitled "The Unintended Consequences of Small Business Contracting." The center intends to release this and a couple of other working papers from the other senior fellows over the next couple of weeks. And I observed in that paper that these themes have taken on an increasingly important role in our community, and there have been a number of really good studies that have started to get done in this area, looking at some of the dilemmas or challenges and the fallouts of the way we've been enacting our small business policies. PSC has taken the issue up. Jack Gansler, before he passed, finished a very good study up at the University of Maryland. The 809 panel spent a great deal of effort looking at small business acquisition reform issues and came up with some specific recommendations. CSIS and their Defense Industrial Initiatives group looked at new entrants and small business graduation rates. One of the first efforts that really started to look at quantifying and coming up with some empirical data on how small businesses last, and progress, but they didn't link it with any causal analysis, right? So we're starting to see an empirical foundation that we can start to bring together with some more discussion. And then most recently, the GAO's recent report on mid-sized businesses has some very good fodder for this discussion as well. So the thesis of my research was that while the social and economic objectives are clearly admirable, and I'm going to repeat, I let the note say, Craig said, while the social and economic objectives are clearly admirable, they may not be rational from an economic or technical standpoint, and there may be unintended consequences. So in terms of job creation, value creation for their founders and owners, effectiveness in supporting the government's mission through the contracts which they're performing. And so before teeing myself up as the villain, from a small business standpoint, I'm really not questioning the virtue of these kinds of programs, but feel that there may be more direct ways that we can accomplish those social and economic objectives while mitigating some of the adverse impact, and unintended impacts that some of these policies may help create. So the goal of that paper was to build on some of that recent work and to initiate a discussion that we could help set the table for further conversation and research on these kinds of topics. So I bring that in from that perspective as a moderator. So to begin, I'm going to turn it over to the three of you for some introductory comments. I hope you'll introduce yourself and kind of the scope of your current role and other roles that you've played that provide context for your perspectives. Discuss some of the pros and cons of things that you've seen with the programs and policies from your vantage point. Any specific examples and the kind of your anecdotes would be great that you've seen and some lessons learned. And then any commentary on key changes that you've seen recently or that are kind of in progress that you think are going to help shape the landscape going forward. So. Ben, do you want to start for us? We'll just work on down the line.
Thanks, Greg. That was a great introduction. So I'm Ben Edson. I'm the founder and CEO of VariQ. For those that don't know me, I started the company back in 2003. I had wanted some more money, so I threw my resume up on monster.com. And from San Antonio, a company won a contract. I moved to DC and I was the contract, right? So I didn't really know anything what a contract was other than I was supposed to be the security architect at the US Senate and work with the entire Senate to deploy their first antivirus system, which on the first day that I kicked off the project, they said, welcome to the Senate, this is where you're not going to succeed. Literally. So I'm like, oh, well, you obviously don't know entrepreneurs, right? So entrepreneurs are the types of individuals that could take a beating every day. They could be told no, 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 and they show up again the next day, and as if nothing happened the previous day. So I have kind of an interesting background. I grew up missionary overseas, Argentina mostly. I did a lot of door-to-door selling, and then when I left missionary work, I did commercial fishing in Alaska. And then I started an eBay business, and then I started a real estate business, and in between all of that, I decided that I wanted to start college. So it's not a completely structured path. And a lot of small businesses are essentially learners, right? They learn, and they don't know day to day that they can't. They are figuring things out as they go. So today, I have a mid-tier company. We're a $50 million company with about 300 folks. I figured out after 8 years of subcontracting and that there's this thing called prime contract wins, and prime contracts are always better than subcontracts because you get to decide quicker which people you want to hire and which people you don't, and put them to work, and then you could manage them more effectively. So we converted in 2011 from 35 employees that were largely subcontracting to the Lockheeds, to other General Dynamics and bigger contractors, which was, to me, an experience that was extremely valuable, right? I'd never seen a teaming agreement. I never saw an NDA written up. I didn't have any of those attributes that maybe a more sophisticated individual that came out of government or that's worked for a Lockheed or a GD in proposal shops, BD, they come with a set of tools that are instinctive to them, and they say, hey, we have all this structure and we know the mechanics. Well, I never knew how a proposal was written, so the first time I worked a proposal with Lockheed, I was like, 30 days writing a proposal. Oh, good, now I know how to do it. So I went out and wrote a proposal myself, and we won against Microsoft. So, again, there's a lot of these things where you don't know you're not supposed to. There's all these things as a small business where people tell you you're just not allowed to be successful, and you don't know that, and so you just go ahead and you do it anyway. Where it gets a little bit trickier is as you progress, right? So you progress from one agency or one contract, your recompetes come around, and then all of a sudden maybe your customers where you built a good relationship, they all of a sudden get promoted into another agency or they leave to industry. So there's these additional dynamics that start to happen that are completely out of your control. Fast forward to the mid-tier status, to Craig, what you mentioned. All of the contracts that you were successful in winning, and DHS is one example. We were very successful on DHS Eagle. We were in the top 10 of awardees on DHS Eagle, HubZone. So you get these things that are both exhilarating and very successful, and then at the same time you run into the realities and challenges. For example, at DHS, we happened to be in one of the pools that was awarded and started work before any of the other pools, called the HubZone track, right? So within the world of small businesses, there's all of these carve-outs for different types of small business, and they all have different rules. We happen to be very successful in winning the HubZone track. Well, we won a series of contracts in the first year, 2014, and then the other tracks became open for business, and there was nothing anymore in the HubZone track for years. So they then went and moved into the 8A track, filled that up. They went into the SDVOSB track, filled that up. And then when all of the tracks were filled, they then started competing against all smalls. So now there's more competition. And those are the types of things that as a business owner, you don't always know, right? So you become very successful in one area, you put more investments into that one area, and then you fail possibly to diversify in other areas, not because of lack of trying, but because you don't have this crystal ball that says that some procurement place up in the high, and I'm going to point over here, they have their own unique goals, right? So, and you don't know what those things are. You're just working every day. So, all that to say, you keep trying, right? And you start to shift your investments in other areas where you think there's a little bit more volume, where there's a little bit more opportunity, and that changes the type of company that you also become. And if you're not willing to constantly change and adapt, you won't be successful as a small business. So we started to do that. We diversified. We won a lot of other work in Treasury, and eventually we were successful in winning some unrestricted contracts, and now we're large. Boom. And in the large, everything that you did as small, those contracts come up for recompete, and you go to your customers and say, hey, move this contract to us because we've been successful. You've been giving us exceptional CPARs every day. Every year you're saying that you love us, you know our people, and they're like, you are the epitome of small business success. And because of that, we're going to keep it as a small business set aside. Good luck. So that's essentially what they said, right? So those are the small business offices.
That eloquent, but
They weren't that eloquent, but they basically said, hey, you guys proved that small businesses could do that. So go find somebody else. Good luck. Go find somebody else. Put them in front of you and try, and then we're going to put it out for competition.
Enjoy that 49% from here
Correct,
on.
yes. And by the way, rebadge the people that love your culture, they love how you manage them, they love you, company A or B or VariQ. They love you. And then now you tell them, no, you're just a commodity. Go work for someone else, try to win your own work. And so those are very difficult transitions to go through. We're going through that right now. We have 6 of our small business contracts that we won in different agencies, and they were all recompeted this year. And not only is it a challenge of you're being recompeted, but you actually don't know where they're going to go. Because all of us, this is Treasury IRS. I'll pick I'm kind of real. I actually like real stories. So Treasury IRS, they said best-in-class vehicles are the way of the future. Policy from on high. Collapse tips for. Another vehicle we were very successful. So we're going to this menu cart of best-in-class small business vehicles, and we don't know which menu item we're going to pick. So one of our contracts goes 8A stars, another one goes vets 2. So you almost have to have this feeder system of intelligence gathering apparatus to try to figure out where your work might go. This is after you've successfully been a small business, and at the same time try to win unrestricted work, right? Because that's the future. That's what the PE firms like. Right. That's what the large businesses, that's the place where they can stabilize. So retain your work at 50%, compete against the biggest folks, and so that's where we're at. So it's actually very exciting because I'm one of those folks that when someone says you can't do it, and there's a study that came out and said 2.5% of small businesses actually make the transition successfully into the mid-tier or large business. I'm like, well, there's a chance. Well, that's VariQ. So
that's great.
So so we just won a series of contracts on a line to unrestricted, and we're making that transition. And as a CEO, it's both exciting and nerve-wrenching, and so you work through all of those emotions, and every day there's somebody saying, hey, we want to buy you. Hey, we want to buy your customers. Hey, we want to buy your... And you almost every day have to make that conscious decision of, I like the journey, I like the people I'm working with, I like the challenge, and I have to move forward. So I'm in that position. It's not a fun thing going from small business to mid-tier, but it is part of the success trajectory, right? You were somewhat protected, and that's what these policies are designed to do. I think they're to give you some level of incubation, but at the same time, there's policies that don't necessarily make you successful in that next step. So I would love to see more policy around the transition and how to help mid-tiers, because there's a lot of smalls, there's a cone of larges, and there's a very few mid-tiers to make it a healthy ecosystem.
Great, thanks, Ben. That's great. So now tell them how lucky.
It's a lesson.
Tell them how lucky he is.
Okay, here we go.
business
Ready?
he's
No,
got.
I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. Hi, I'm Soraya Correa. I'm the Chief Procurement Officer at the Department of Homeland Security. Pleasure to be with you today and to be with this distinguished panel. I am not with the Small Business Administration, so let me make that clear. However, I run one of the more successful small business programs in federal government at the Department of Homeland Security. Since the Small Business Administration started using a grading score, the Department of Homeland Security has scored an A on their small business scorecard for the last 10 years in a row. And that has not been an accident. Thank you. Thank you. And I'm very happy to say that of those 10 A's that we've scored, 4 of them were A pluses, meaning we exceeded our goals in all the categories. And like I said, that's not by accident. That's because we have made a very strong and concerted effort to make small business a part of our thinking every single day. So part of our procurement policies and how we approach our procurements and working with our customers is to first consider small businesses and consider all the categories of small businesses. And that's true whether we're buying a single item or we're doing a government-wide acquisition or a DHS-specific acquisition. That is also true in how we look at our best-in-class contracts that we've adopted into our portfolio of contracts that we use. We really have sat down and analyzed those contracts to determine what are the contracts that bring us small businesses, the right small businesses, and give us that opportunity to continue to capitalize on the work that we've done with small businesses. That said, I'm going to revert back to talking a little bit about myself. I have a 39-year career in the federal government. I've worked at the Naval Sea Systems Command, General Services Administration, NASA, Immigration and Naturalization Service, and of course, the Department of Homeland Security, where I've served as a head of contracting twice. So as a head of contracting, I was responsible for awarding contracts. As the Chief Procurement Officer, now I oversee the work of the heads of contracting. In addition to that, I should mention that I've been both a customer of procurement as well as being the person that does the procurement, because I've served in several capacities as a program management or run a major organization running major programs. And when we talk about mid-tier companies, the first thing I think you should know is I'm a huge advocate of small business. If anybody has heard my former colleague, Kevin Boshier, speak, he always loved working with me because my question was not how to avoid small business, how do I include them? How do I make it beneficial for them to participate in a particular procurement? Or when does it make sense not to include them because it could hurt them? Because we do have to think about that. We have to think about how we manage that procurement to include small business, but to make sure that we don't make it so difficult that the small business ends up either getting themselves in trouble, being able to perform, or worse yet, going out of business. So that's an extremely part of our discussion that we typically have. The rules are designed to help small businesses, to help companies come into the federal government space and do business with the federal government. And they've created categories of small business where they have seen that perhaps some companies have, or some certain types of companies have more difficulty getting in, whether women-owned, service-disabled, et cetera. So the idea behind the small business program, it's not just to throw money at small businesses or throw contracts at small businesses. It's really to enable and support them and give some benefits, some opportunity for us to really consider pushing work in a particular direction because it makes sense to go in that direction, not just because they're small businesses or we can make our goals. Some of the examples that I like to give, and I say this very often, people will hear me say this. Small businesses create jobs. Small businesses bring innovation. It's easier for small businesses to deliver innovation. That doesn't mean that large can't. It doesn't mean that they won't. It just means it's a little bit easier because they're a little less bureaucratic. That's a fact. Okay, small businesses tend to bring in entrepreneurs and people like that who are really those provocative folks. And there is some work that lends itself perfectly to smaller businesses that helps them grow. So we have to consider that as part of the equation. We also have to deal with the programs that we serve, the customers that we serve. And sometimes they are uncomfortable bringing in a new company, a company that has never done business with them before. Sometimes they're uncomfortable because there is a myth out there, some of you probably have heard this, that large businesses have a pool of people that are sitting out there doing nothing but waiting for the next task order. Have you heard that one? Okay, just want to check. Because in my 39 years of business, I know that that's not true. What I know is that a large company has the ability to dig into other projects to bring resources, whether temporary or permanent, to immediately address a need if something comes up. Where a small business might not have enough of those resources sitting out there, and they do have to go out and hire and all that good stuff. That's the real difference between the two. Anybody disagree with me on that? I just want to check. I disagree, because I know companies don't have people just sitting off on a bench doing nothing. So sometimes you have to work with your program offices to help them understand what the subtle nuances are. A little bit about mid-tiers, okay? Because like I said, I'm not here to defend the small business program. I'm here as someone who advocates and supports a small business program within the Department of Homeland Security. I advocate and support that our small businesses who do a great job for us get the right CPARs, that we give good references so that they can get work in other federal agencies or even out in industry, and that they are either continued to be included in certain programs or at least be brought on, hopefully, as subcontractors on future programs. But we don't drive that. We should never drive that. It should be up to the small business. What we need to do is make sure that we're treating them properly. But a word about mid-tiers. So I understand the plight of the mid-tier. I hear it. I probably hear it more than anybody else because I let you guys come in and tell me every day, right? Because I meet with industry on a very regular basis and I come out and talk to you. But here's the deal. Every time I ask this question, nobody gives me a good answer. What is a mid-tier? What is the upper range of a mid-tier? I'm waiting. That's the problem. I think that's the real problem. I think if it were easy to define, we would have done it by now. Because I think everybody understands, at least most of us that are in this business understand, that when a company graduates from a small business, they enter this land, right, this gray area where they're not really large, but they're no longer small. And they're not sure how to compete in that area or who they're really going to compete with, because they may be competing with fellow mid-tiers, depending on the project, or they may be competing with those really large businesses. So I get that. I get that. But I think the big problem is, how do you define mid-tier? At what point do we stop supporting the company, right? Because at the end of the day, I want to remind everyone, I don't know about other federal agencies. That's a joke. Don't quote me. But all of us in the federal government are not just buying to buy. We're buying because we're supporting a need. We're fulfilling requirements. We're serving a mission. So it's not just about throwing money at small businesses or mid-tiers or large companies. It is about fulfilling needs. And so we base, hopefully, we base our decisions on whether it's going to be small business or large business or some combination or subcontract, whatever. We're basing it on a requirement, the market research that we've done that tells us who's out there that can fulfill that need in the ways that we need it fulfilled, because there are always parameters to how you're fulfilling that need. And hopefully those are the decisions that we're making. So please don't think that we're not sympathetic to what you're saying. But I always am baffled by the silence that comes back to me when I say, but define a mid-tier for me. And I know why the silence. I'm not I'm not dumb. I get it. I understand, because it's going to vary by industry. It's going to vary by NAICS code. I get that. But how do you define that? What is a fair mid-tier, pick your NAICS code? And that's where I think the dilemma is. Several years ago, our small business, our director of Office of Small and Disadvantaged Business Utilization, Kevin Boshiers, and I, when I was head of contracting and OPO, talked about trying to do a mid-tier set-aside, okay? Just to try it out, because, if you've heard about me, I kind of do crazy stuff every now and then. And so we thought we'd try something out. Failed miserably. We didn't even get out the door with it, because we got so many challenges from you, as well as our legal counsels, about, well, how are you defining mid-tier? What is a mid-tier? So that's a big challenge, and I think if this were easy, we would have solved it a long time ago. I really believe that. What I will say, though, is that we do have a responsibility to the companies that we bring onto our contracts to make sure that we get them their performance evaluations, and that we get them those opportunities to continue competing across the federal government, because maybe the competition may no longer be here, but maybe you have the ability to work in other agencies. And so I do think about those things, and I continuously think about the mid-tier and how do you broach that subject. But I can promise you that if I had that answer, I'd retire and go out there and sell it to somebody, but I don't. What I do want you to know is that at DHS, we do care about the small businesses. We think about it all the time. We pursue companies at all levels of small businesses, from the consultant entrepreneur who's just come into the business, has a great idea. We have our Silicon Valley Innovation Program. We just did our Commercial Solutions Opening Pilot, which is very successfully bringing in some companies of all sizes to do work for us, as well as our other Transaction Authority, which we're going to talk about, I'm sure, later. But also we monitor who we're doing business with. It's not the usual suspects. We bring in probably on average about 2,000 companies per year that have not done business with the small businesses that have not done business with the department before. That tells you that we're out there really looking for companies and really doing good market research to try to bring in companies and give them those opportunities that companies like yours have had to come in and learn the business and work with us. Final word, Leslie Field is going to be on the next panel, so y'all can talk to her about best in class. Best in class is common sense. You do it in industry, and we should be doing it in government. What I have said repeatedly, publicly, on radio shows and everywhere, it is not a 100% solution. What best in class is gives us an opportunity to look at those common set of requirements and hopefully use some common set of vehicles that bring us some economies of scale, whether better pricing, better solutions, et cetera. But they're not a 100% solution. And that's why we at DHS talk about our portfolio of contracts. And we continue to award contracts, strategically sourced contracts, as well as individually awarded contracts to support very specific mission needs. Because no contract ever has a 100% solution. I can't tell you what the solution is that I need tomorrow for certain IT requirements today. And that's going to be true for going forward. What I can tell you is that we will continue to work with industry to make sure that we pick the right solutions to fulfill our mission requirements. But let me be very clear. We buy because of the missions that we serve, not just because we want to buy. That's
very nice. Amen. Hi, I'm Dolly Oberoi. I don't look like Sumit, but I am from the same sort of ethnic background.
Tell them you're better looking.
So, thank you for inviting me. I'm just filling in for him. But so I have been a small business owner for the last 30 years. We're celebrating our 30th anniversary as we speak. And my story is a little bit different. I came from India to learn about technology and take it back to India for education. And I came as a tourist. I was scouting the place. That was the only way I could get away from my mom and dad without getting married with a man and all that other stuff that happens. So I just said I was going to travel the world, find technology, because my mom has K through 12 schools in New Delhi, and she started 60 years ago. So I said, I have a vision. I want to really bring technology back to the country, and we'll be the first ones to have technology in education. And they said, have you seen a computer? I said, no, but you know, the world is my oyster. I'll go find one. And my mother said, they don't grow on trees. I said, I'll note that. So I started traveling across the globe, and I came to the United States. I ended up going to Boston to visit some friends, and they said, hey, do you have a mission, or you're just roaming around? I said, this is what I want to do. I want to find computers for learning. And this gentleman was a friend of mine. He had just got a job at Tufts as a professor, and he said, hey, MIT has a demo going on of something, and I'll take you there. And he did. I called my mother and said, I found the tree that grows computers. I'm not coming back. And I had $200 and a backpack. I'd spent most of the $200 by then, and my mother was screaming, my father was screaming, and my father was more worried that I didn't have a man. My mother was more worried that I was a woman without money in a foreign country. So anyway, we went through all that drama, and I applied to school, and I tried to apply to school because every day I went and talked to the admissions director and said, look, I came here only with $200. I have $50 left, and I can't pay for your admission form even. So can you waive that? And also, oh, by the way, the GRE fee and the TOEFL, I had to take a test for English language. All of that was adding up to be about $500 in 1984. So that was a lot of money. And so I used to advocate for myself every single day, and one day the woman got tired and said, why don't you go talk to the dean instead of annoying me every single day? We can't do any of this. So the dean asked me, why are you here? I said, look, I've left my country to come here to get technology, and I teach first generation of learners. They don't understand anything. I teach them, so I want to connect them to the globe through satellites and computers and all that. She said, oh, so you have a vision. That was the time I learned what a vision meant. So she said, you have a vision? I said, oh, that sounds good. Yes, I do have a vision. So she she said, look, I can't waive any of this stuff. GRE, take a cheaper test, MAT, Miller's Analogies test. That was about $100 cheaper. So she gave me that option. And test for English language. She thought about it. She said, it's a State Department requirement, and we can't waive it. But since you fight so hard in English, you must know English. And I said, yes, I do know English, so if you can waive that. So that started my entrepreneurial journey because I had no money. I had to raise capital, get myself admitted to a school, get a degree. Then I had to go back to India and take all that stuff. So, of course, I did all of those things. And I found myself, I graduated successfully from a joint Harvard-MIT program where edX and all have taken birth now, but this was 30 years ago. So of course nobody understood my vision except my crazy idea of connecting the globe through computers. I went to India and they said, sorry, we don't understand what you are talking about, too early. I come back to the United States, sorry, we don't know what you're talking about, too early, we don't use computers for learning. So what do I have to do? I have to create my own job, and that's what led me to creating C Squared. And I have to say that I think ignorance is bliss sometimes. When you don't know anything, then you do crazy things, and then they work out, and you're like, wow, that was cool. But it does get exponentially harder after that, to Ben's point. So anyway, that started the company, and the first contract was with FEMA. And they're still our customer. I'm very proud of that. So in 1989, they put out a bid. I didn't know anything about bids and all that stuff. Put out a bid to do a feasibility study on how to use alternate learning methods to reduce cost and travel and all that stuff. So I said, well, distance learning, that's my background. They need distance learning. So I responded to that. I got help from a lot of people because I just didn't know how to respond to an RFP. And my husband worked for GDIT, and I told him what I was doing. He said, you're never going to win. You don't know anything. And I said, okay, I have something others don't have. I didn't tell him that because he was a competitor. So we won. I mean, I got a call from FEMA, and they said, can you please come tomorrow and sign this thing? And I didn't know about contracts, never seen a contract, and got the contract. $72,000 contract launched our company. Because I went and I did the feasibility study and then trained every single person at the National Fire Academy and National Emergency Training Center in Emmitsburg. Every single person in that room was a potential customer. That's what launched the company. But I did a 1-year-long project, and then projects just started coming in and coming in. Can you do this? Can you do this? And then one day, one of the contracting officers said to me, you look like you're from another country. I said, yeah. And she said, do you think you can get 8A? I said, what is 8A? And she said, we want to get to you, but we don't know how to get to you. And I said, what is 8A? I researched, and I said, Cindy, you have to be a citizen to do that. I'm not a citizen. I'm not giving up my citizenship to swap for some 8A thing. And she said, no, you really need to do that. I didn't do it for about 5 or 6 years. But what those 5 or 6 years did for me as a small business made me so competitive, because I would put all my energy into winning. I was so hungry for that next contract, and it was so exciting. It was such an exciting journey. And then everybody said, you're stupid, you need to go get your citizenship and get your 8A. So then I did get my 8A, but I never used it because I didn't know how to use it. Because I was so busy being competitive, and we won this OPM TMA contract in '96. And I have to tell you, that was the best contract to launch a small business because all the customers were coming there for their trading and human capital talent management needs, including DHS when it was formed. And we were a small business, and there were no lanes. Small business had to compete with large business. We were all just thrown in. 3 to 5 vendors were invited, oral presentations. Oral presentations were my stock and trade because I grew up as a debater. And secondly, in college, we had this extemporaneous competition that you had to speak, if you could last 60 seconds and engage the engage the audience, you would win a prize. Otherwise, they would throw tomatoes and rotten eggs and all sorts of things. So you would wear a helmet and so I was used to that aggressive speaking engagement sort of thing. So it really worked out in my favor. I said, it's the first time in my life my mother was right. She said, because she always said that, you've got to be able to speak in public, you got to do this. And I was kind of shy at the time. Now, of course, I have a hard time being shy. But the point is that as a small business, let me just be honest with you, it is the most exciting thing you can do. I can't sleep at night 30 years later because I'm so excited all the time. Now, what SBA is a blessing and a curse for the simple reason that when you need their help, they're there, right? You got the small business set-asides and it's exciting, you're winning, you're doing all that. But it's counterintuitive to entrepreneurship because the whole goal is to be successful, meet the mission of the agencies. And I have to tell you, everybody in my company for 30 years has said, why do you work with FEMA? They don't pay much. You have to pay them for the privilege of working with them. I said, but what is the impact? The impact is when 9/11 happened, they used our training. When Oklahoma City bombing happened, they used our training. I said, that's the impact. Because you can't just get up and get excited about contracts. You've got to get excited about what value you deliver to your customers, how you help them meet their missions, because they have important missions. So that's what has kept me going. I have to say there were many challenges. There was challenge of access to capital. I was just mentioning to our banker is here, and I was just saying, thank goodness we have a good banker now. I couldn't even get $5,000 or $10,000 loan at the time. Even SBA, because there was nobody to guarantee. Before I met my husband, there was nobody to guarantee the loan. There was nobody. So, and being an immigrant, on an H-1B visa, all sorts of other issues. And so there was many, many challenges, access, cultural barriers. People forget. People talk about immigrants. Guys, our life is pretty hard when you can't even understand the accent of the next person. So I have to tell you, one of the funniest things that happened, I had an internship at IBM when I was in college in Boston, and this man said, "Rah." This is what I heard, "Rah." So I looked at my watch and I said, it's 12 o'clock. He must be asking me to have lunch with him. So I got up and I went and said, okay, let's go. And I'm sure to this day I haven't asked him, what was going on in your head? Because we went and had lunch and there was nothing to say at lunch. And I said, I think I have a cultural problem. I don't understand the accent of these people. So, such basic thing as accent, so much misunderstanding can happen. So in business, I wasn't signing agreements. People would send me agreements and I would just sign them blindly or not even read them because I came from a country where you did things on a handshake. And I was in my 20s. I had never even had a handshake in my own country, much less in this country. So just so many things that you don't know, and that's why one of the things I've been mentioning to GMU is we've got to start a program, especially I've started for high schoolers, a business program for high schoolers, where I have a boot camp for them, but now we must do that for startups in GovCon and women and all that.
And Dolly, can I jump in? I wanted to build on something you just said and take one of the questions that we've got coming in from the audience. And it really, it's your fortitude and stick-to-itiveness in terms of competing, notwithstanding what category you were in. And I think, Ben, you talked about that as well. It was all about being competitive. More than the assistance is great to have access to, but it's also that drive, what makes the difference between somebody who may get stuck or trapped or, face some of those, unintended consequences is that kind of drive. Can you provide, the question was, What advice do you have for businesses that have graduated from small and now face competing as a large? Many of these small businesses fail or have to position for sale, but what can agencies do to help these mid-sized companies, going back to our question before? But let's start, I think, maybe with Dolly, with you and with Ben, in terms of, okay, what's made the difference in your abilities to compete on a full and open basis after having had some support along the way and kind of moving into that graduated phase? What's the difference maker between success and failure?
So I'll give you the example of OPM TMA contract. The first round, we were a small business. Second round, we were over 11 million. I mean, it's a very, look, I understand that we can't define mid-tier, but what I don't understand is why are the NIACs so low? I mean, you get 2 contracts, you're out of the NIACs code. Now you're, even an $11 million company with 1 more cent is now a large business in the area they're competing in. So the business that I am in, education, consulting, human resources, all of those, they're all under, now it's 16, the size standard adjusted for inflation. They are all under 16, 12 million, 11 million. It's absolutely counterintuitive to success. So what you have to do is, as I mentioned, we became so competitive without the parachutes and all the wonderful things that SBA offers. You have to know what business you're in, who your competitors are, what is the special value you offer. Because I hear this constantly, oh, I can't compete because that one is HubZone, I'm this. I don't believe in that. I think you have to create your own value, and we have successfully gone from one, we are very fortunate, we have successfully gone from one threshold to the next. In the old days, it used to be 5 million, then 11 million, then 15, then 23, then 25, 27, 30 million. We have graduated from each very methodically because we were competing. After we graduated from 11 million, we were competing in full and open because under OPM TMA, there were no lanes. So we were competing with Booz Allen, Deloitte, and all. I have to tell you, it was very, very exciting because we went on strategy while they went on strength and their size. We went on strategy. In one day at CDC, we beat Booz Allen in 3 competitions. In one day, we had oral presentations. And why did we do that? I'm not trying to brag here. What I'm saying is you've got to be very deliberate. And I know they have a lot of resources. We know that. But you can't be daunted by that. You've got to go on strategy. And you put your effort in.
With VariQ.
So we did a couple things coming out of 2017 when we saw that we were graduating. The SBA and had just implemented mentor-protege rules that expanded the mentor-protege program not only for 8A firms but for the other socioeconomic firms. So we put in place, we found a protege, and we started the 8A path. So we put together a joint venture, small business, that would be 8A. We set up a separate one that would be HubZone. Under the HubZone one, we won a couple vehicles, and we positioned some of the JVs as, I call it maintenance and access. So trying to maintain access to the market as a prime, to me, is extremely important in not just flipping your work. So we just won one of our recompetes under the CISP3 HubZone, where we have a protege under a CISP3 mentor-protege program. So that's worked pretty well. The other thing we did very early on is take advantage of a diversity of contracts that we had won and actually put those to use. So Alliant 2, we bid both. Some folks said, hey, you're on the cusp of small, so you should win that one, so bid the small. And I said, we're on the cusp of large, so I should bid the large. And others, and at the end of the day, people are like, what, you bid both? Why didn't we think about that? So we bid both, and we won both. And then, of course, the small one, where we had a lot of our business development organization and all of our recompetes, we were very excited to win the small one because that was our path for the small work. And all of a sudden, protests, and then the death of that vehicle for a long period of time. So we rechanneled and focused on the unrestricted. right? So in the end, you kind of have to tactically, I think, try to go for both. You can, we do different types of contracts. So when you have a diversity of skills, you can't just focus on one type of work. It helps to go after different types of work. And so for us, to graduate, we've been successful in winning some IDIQs that are on the unrestricted side. We've won some tasks on the unrestricted side. And at the same time, I love small business because the contracting offices are different, the mission needs are still very important, and I've spent 10 years learning how to be successful. The partner ecosystem that I've developed is there. So the challenge is, I kind of like it all, right? I like competing against the Booz Allens because that's a unique challenge, and I play soccer and I'm a striker, and you only play soccer and striker if you want a goal. So the large businesses present that goal for me, which is very exciting. At the same time, you need to rely on your experience as well, and the experience of the rest of your team. And as the rest of your team matures to the next level, to me, it's extremely important to give them both options. So access in the small business is still very valuable, while competing in the large business is very exciting and rewarding. And those are some of the tools that we've used.
Can I chime in?
Yeah, and I wanted to follow up specifically with you about his observation about the Mentor Protege joint venture, and from the other than small perspective of leveraging it for access. Is that what you're looking for, or are you really looking for mentorship of the smalls and
Well, I'm
those
not looking for
partnerships?
anything. It
Yeah.
depends on what I'm buying and what our needs are. We don't target small businesses just because they're small businesses. We really are targeting because they bring something to the table. I do want to mention something. The most significant thing I heard from both companies up here is competition. That they had the energy, the drive to say, I want to be successful, and great, I have this small business, well, in your case, you didn't even know you had it, but you have these small business programs that can help you, but that isn't what drove either of these two individuals to be successful. What drove them to be successful was the desire to be successful, the thought that they could do something, they could deliver something, and that they would take on the next challenge. And arguably, I do think there are unintended consequences of the small business program, where sometimes some companies do become lazy and they become reliant on that program, whatever program it may be, whatever element of the program, to rely on that to carry them forward. I think what I have seen, and I have seen many small businesses be successful, and I've seen many fail. And I think what I believe I've seen is the ones that are successful are the ones that really have something that they bring to the table. That they didn't come just because they were an 8A or just because they were a small business. They come to the table because they have an idea, technology, something that they really are going to sell, including skill and talent. And they continue to cultivate that as they take advantage of these programs to get in the door of many federal agencies. And so what I think I see is that. I also think I'm the same way as you guys. I love a good challenge. So I think competing against those big companies, those companies that have been successful before, is also a driver here when I hear the companies are successful. Mentor Protege programs are good. I think they're excellent when they're properly executed. What I have seen is when both companies come at it for the right reason, meaning we each have something that we can gain from one another, where the mentor sees something in this protege that is something that they can cultivate and develop, and that protege says, I can really learn from this company and deliver something, learn how to deliver and how to do business with the federal government. When those companies come together, I have seen huge successes. I'm a huge fan of the Mentor Protege program because I think that's a great way to help smaller companies break into those larger contracts that could get you in trouble if you don't really know how to do business with the government, or if you've never really engaged in a major contract, or if you're working sometimes on a difficult program. So I'm a huge fan of Mentor Protege programs. I do want to see mentor-protege programs expanded a bit. I mean, I have all kinds of ideas. I know that TSA and myself and a couple of other folks have talked about something like incentives, creating incentives for folks to jump into the mentor-protege program a little bit more, both for small and large. So I'm a huge fan of mentor-protege programs, but I'm also a huge fan of seeing small businesses say, I'm not going to be a victim. I'm sorry. I'm just, maybe for my 39-year career and because I too kind of came up from a grassroots level, you fight for your success. And I think that that's what differentiates the successful small business from the unsuccessful small business, is that fight for the success.
That's great. I love that perspective. And I think that there's so it kind of leads to another kind of logical question of how do you make the decision, right? And so from the government standpoint, what's the right size for set-aside opportunities? And from a small business's perspective, when do you decide to make the leap? When you know that it's going to take you, you're going to blow through the NAICS code. It's going to put you up where you're, where you're going to lose your status, right? How do you decide when it's time to take the leap and on what size of an opportunity to do it? And from the government standpoint, do you knowingly create opportunities out there that are going to create that event in the course of the companies that are going to compete for it? You want to start? Start, please.
First, on NAICS codes, a really important point. I do think we take too long to update NAICS codes. I really do. I think there's got to be a better way to do that, because I think some of those numbers are a little small. Even when we're making the determination of small business set aside or not, and we're looking at our requirement, we go, wow, this NAICS code is pretty small. And so that makes us uncomfortable, especially if it's a really big contract that requires a large staffing element, and you have to bring a lot of staff on board or very geographically dispersed. But that doesn't deter us. What we really do is, if we think there are small businesses out there, if we really believe that there's capability out there, the smart thing, and what I try to encourage people to do, is get out there and ask. Don't just rely on databases that tell you that they're a small business and they meet whatever NAICS code. Go out with as much information as possible and ask industry. Are you small? Can you do this? What experience do you have doing this? There's nothing wrong with that kind of market research to better understand what the market is out there, because there have been many instances where program offices came to us thinking it had to be done by a large business, and we demonstrated, and they ended up selecting small businesses to do something that they really thought only a large could do. So that market research and creating that opportunity for our programs to meet with industry, that means dispelling that myth that programs can't talk to companies before the RFP goes out, making that opportunity for them to meet small businesses, hear from them, maybe even have one-on-one sessions. Is how we should be making our decisions. And so I'm pushing that more and more. And that means that we got to do a better job of planning on these acquisitions, and we have to do a better job of reaching out to industry and asking the right questions. I've seen many projects go from having been large to go to small, because we learned that there were smalls that could do it with great capabilities, or who knew how to enter into the right types of teaming arrangements to get to what needed to be done for the government. So, but I do think that we don't do that all the time, A. B, sometimes because of the way money falls out, how our budget hands out, we're under the gun to make awards, and so we make sometimes very quick decisions. It takes time to do good market research. It does take time to investigate the market, especially when you're in a new area.
That's great. I'll offer a personal anecdote of a company that I was involved in buying when I was with one of the larger companies. I won't say who it was. But when we went through the management presentations, they told us, and they were an R&D oriented company, they told us that they had a strategy that they were executing. It was called this 1500 strategy, right? And so the NAICS code was 1,500 employees at that point in time. Their strategy was to no bid their recompetes or lose business to get their average revenues back down below 1,500. Right, so we did buy that company, and we immediately fired that guy after we closed the deal. So, but we know that there are some traps, right? There are some of these kind of threshold traps that force those hard decisions. Dolly, I mean, how have you kind of wrestled with the decisions of when you break out and what you go after that helps you get to that next level?
So we were very fortunate. about 15 years ago, we actually broke out of small business sizes. We went into unrestricted. We knew in the areas we knew we were very competitive. We won in the unrestricted GVACs and BPAs and in the unrestricted category. So then that just transitioned us very naturally. Now, where we got trapped was that they were, we do a lot of aerospace and defense work. There's flight services, NIACs, that is 27.5. But the contracts are 50 million and above. And so I think that's where it breaks down as a business owner. What is the government thinking? 50 million and above and a $27 million company, you get 3 of those, you're out. And what does, so you have to sort of, it is almost like you have to do things in parallel. If you're successful, if you've decided you're going to stay a small business under 27 or whatever you decide, then it's fine. You manage to those numbers. But if you are entrepreneurial and say, no, I'm not going to be satisfied with that, then you have to work in parallel, go after the GVACs, the BPAs, and all of those so that you have a pipeline, regular pipeline for at least 5 to 10 years like we have on HCATs and others now. Otherwise, it's very hard to make that transition. So it has to be a very, very deliberate effort, like Ben said.
Thanks, Ben. Any more thoughts on that?
So for us, it's diversification of contracts, diversification of customers, and that creates a lot of stability. Stability in that you could lose 1, 2, 3 of your contracts and still be very successful as a company. The second piece is, when is it a good time to make those jumps? Well, we're straddling right now. We're in the mid-tier. We have on one hand a couple small business contracts and IDIQs where we think we're going to be very, very successful. On the other hand, I want my workforce to be inspired and challenged every day. And so and including myself, right? What creates those next challenges? Is it to go on an acquisition, to double up? Because when you're growing, that creates opportunity for growth for your own folks. So what is that ecosystem balance of growth that creates opportunity for promotions and other things so that folks don't leave because they find promotions and opportunities elsewhere? Or hold on to, in our particular case, we have Alliant 2 small business. It hasn't started yet. We did very well on Eagle. We did very well on TIPS 4. We will likely do very well on Alliant 2. So however, if we go acquire, we immediately have to recertify our status. So you're penalized as a small business, as a mid-tier business. You're immediately penalized if you want to go and grow in an inorganic way. So do you wait to harvest out a contract that you're going to be very good, or do you say, forget it, let's just go? And it would be nice if there was this in between. Yeah. And Craig, you had a paragraph in one of your thesis where you, and I recommend everybody when he releases it to read it, you put a paragraph in here with some policy ideas that I think would be very valuable. One is this idea that if you're a small business and you're going for your recompete, but you are now a large business, there should be some policy rule that allows you to do that, and where the agency can still get that credit. And you, as a small business that's now a large business, you haven't been bought out. You haven't done anything you're not trying to not be a large. You're trying to be a successful large, but at the same time, you should be given that chance to compete for your own recompetes. So I agree with that policy.
Can I interrupt you and ask you a question, though? How do you answer to the small businesses that are going to compete with you who are now larger than them and who has, to quote what you guys said, now they have, they are competing against a company that has these vast resources, et cetera.
So the argument behind that recommendation is that you're waiting the continuity and mission effectiveness as an equally high priority as allowing the access for small.
That sounds really good. I'm asking for the small businesses, those small companies that now are saying, that are now going to be saying to all of us.
We want that contract.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's why I'm good for competing, right? Incumbents lose their work all day long. So, but arbitrarily saying you can't be part of the competition, all of your management has to go manage something else or flip it over, that could create a challenge for mission continuity. And in a lot of cases, I would go into these agencies and it seemed like they were always starting again from square one, right? You build up, the company matures, you flip the contract, and you again start from zero. And you do this in a repetitive cycle that, to me, not all the time, you could say it's reinvigorating, but if we're trying to create mission outcomes, then do we just want reinvigoration, or do we actually want to move the ball forward? And they're difficult things to wrestle with, but it's still, at the end of the day, a competition. So those small businesses, they can team with your competitors, but you as the incumbent should also be allowed somewhat to compete for your own work. And then on the mid-size, I think it was GAO that put this.
Yes. Yeah.
They created this study, and they took an interesting view of what is a mid-tier, and they took a multiple of 10 from the NAICS code. So if you're in 27.5 million, those NAICS codes have now gone up to 30 million, or if you're at 15 million, and they essentially did a factor of 10. Well, what if you combined this concept of a factor of 10 along with, if you were a small, having that ability to recompete? It would still create some allowance for the mid-tiers and still keep away the predatory large businesses that want to buy their way into accounts. So they buy the small business and then, I know the government.
You still didn't answer my question, though, and I guess let's ask the audience.
It's the competition.
I got that part, I got that, but you're saying, let me compete as an incumbent who has now outgrown the small business category. Let me compete against the small businesses, and my question would be, are the small businesses in agreement with that? Would they say that's fair to us as small businesses?
I would say that's an acquisition strategy decision,
asking,
a choice amongst alternatives.
I got it. It's a choice. I got that part.
Yeah.
I still want to hear what industry has to say. Yeah. I want to hear small businesses tell me, I'm good with that. I'm good with a mid-tier, a company who has now graduated, competing against me, the small businesses that are now trying to win this business, as an incumbent competing against me. I would like to hear what small businesses think about that.
Anybody want to offer a
share
perspective?
I'm just curious.
Sure, in the back there.
Of course it's not fair. I mean, you want to be the next part, right?
Okay.
Brad Parker,
Hey, I was just trying to make sure the glare of light.
It won't be fair. You've got to be able to grow that next generation. The problem is what you're doing is that successful small gets to the mid, and then we're losing that mid. So you're getting caught up, or all they're doing
Agreed.
is selling, and then they go spin up the next small, and you end up with serial entrepreneurs, that have that, they're in their third generation.
Best case. That's the best case.
Right.
Yeah.
Best case.
Right.
Worst case, they get their 8A, they get to the end of their run, they did well, they don't know what they're doing, they sell off, and you never see them at FC events or right?
CCAF. Yeah.
The problem is there is no middle ground right now.
I got you. But that's why I'm asking that question.
I think the 10X, I hadn't heard that before.
I think it was 5. I think it was 5 that I said. It's like 5X or something, whatever the number is.
That might be high, but 5X
Yeah.
or.
Yeah.
But as a government, if you guys come to industry and set the number, we're all going to argue about it anyway.
Exactly.
So why don't you just set it?
Well, and by the way, I'm with you guys. I think the NAICS codes do need to be adjusted a little bit more regular, and they should be a little bit more realistic and consistent with what we do. I mean, there's data out there that they could look at to do that, but that's a different topic. My point, though, is that it's a great idea. I think it's a great strategy. but let's go put it into practice. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to let another agency do it, and let's see how many protests they get from small businesses. Because that's really the issue, that the small companies are going to make the same argument that the mids are making about the large companies, which is, well, wait a minute, that large company, who is an incumbent sometimes, is coming in and I'm trying to compete with them and I can't. I don't have the resources, I don't have the capabilities, and I think the small companies make that same company. So I think it's a great strategy. I want to see it in practice. Tell Treasury to do it. I know my friends over there.
So maybe one last question that we've been dancing around, and it actually was what stimulated my writing the paper in the first place, and that was the Congress passed a law last December, I think, called the Small Business Runway Extension Act, which extended from 3 years to 5 years the average revenue under which the NAICS codes are based. And you would think, okay, well, that's some relief for smalls, and it helps extend a period of lifespan. But it's fascinating to see that there's been really strong proponents and opponents for this legislation, and when you look at it, it tends to help growing firms, and it tends to penalize firms that may have had a spike in a single year whose revenues have declined, right? So you're carrying with you, 4 or 5 years ago worth of performance, and that lives with you. If you're trying to get back down below 1,500, it's going to take you a little longer to do that, right? So what are your all thoughts on, and Dolly, we'll start with you on the, and so we're still waiting for the SBA to finish its regulatory process on that. SBA has actually said they're not in favor of this, but they're going to go back and look at how to promulgate the regulations to put it in place. It's been dragging out. It's coming on 10 months since the law was passed. What are your views? Is that a positive thing for small businesses? Is it a positive thing for our GovCon industry generally?
As you mentioned, at the moment, at the time of, say, it does get implemented, it's very painful for one group and very favorable for another group. So nobody is going to be ever happy. But I think 5 years is too, personally speaking, from experience as a small business, we are at $50 to $60 million range, and we've gone down to 30, and then we had another spike because unfortunately, because of this, it's almost like you're on a roller coaster as a small business. You grow, then you have to go down and all that. So I think 3 years is a reasonable time frame. 5 years is too long, no matter who you are and what your situation is. So it's going to impact everybody one way or the other right now. But I think long term, it is not a favorable thing to go 5 years. It's too long a period of time in this industry, in the small business industry, where there is too much uncertainty.
Okay, Ben?
I haven't. So I do represent CCAF. I sit on the board of this organization called Small Emerging Contracting Advisory Forum, and we collectively might have an opinion. My personal opinion is it doesn't favor me right now, but it doesn't disfavor me. So I kind of take regulation and the rules as they come and try to adjust, because quite frankly, if I wanted to be a policy advocate, I'd be doing policy advocate. I spend most of my days trying to run a company and bid, right? I work with the rules that are given to me and try to do the best that I can. So I don't have an opinion one way or another. I think if you wanted to cycle through the ups and downs a little bit, then a shorter period would be more preferable, but some probably like the fact that you get averaged over a longer period. I don't have a preference.
Soraya, how is it going to impact your procurement world?
It just helps us look at how we define small businesses. I frankly think, I'm not for or against. I'm trying to execute on a mission and enable a mission. Here's what I would say, though. What would be helpful is instead of just slamming out rules, we did some studies behind these rules. So for example, let's look at how many companies graduate, say, from the Service Disabled Veteran-Owned Small Business Program and go on to be successful large businesses. How many companies graduate from 8A and go on to be successful? If looking at this rule, let's do some analysis. How many companies were successful with the 3-year and 5-year? I'm not sure that it's going to make that much of a difference. That's what I don't think I hear that it's going to make that much of a difference, but certainly we're going to abide by the rules. It'll be interesting to see how they're going to implement.
Probably help somebody who was able to go get the legislation
Should
written
pass,
to support
exactly.
the pass,
There was
right?
somebody that got it, right? But what I would say is this: in this day and age where we collect so much data and so easily, why aren't we doing these kinds of studies and analyses so that we can determine whether these rules are really helping or if they're hindering, and what can we do to help? I certainly still believe, philosophically, again, not representing DHS's belief, but my personal belief, that small business programs are good because they, especially in the federal government, because they do enable companies to come in and learn how to do business, et cetera. And I think there should be an ability to help a small business as they graduate, meaning help them get into that next tier and understand how that next tier is going to work and how they might be able to be successful in that. I'm not sure that I've seen that. That's what I would advocate for, more so than just slamming out rules that may or may not help, that may or may not make a company successful. We should be looking, this is going to sound a little Pollyannish, but it's true. We should be helping every company be successful, we in the federal government. So that's what I'd like to see a little bit more of is how do we enable companies to graduate, grow, and be successful without having to come up with tricks or gimmicks or solutions. Let's do it realistically, openly, and honestly, and with full transparency.
I'd like to foot stomp a point you made about the not doing the studies and not having the data. The CSIS study actually did do a longitudinal study on businesses that entered the federal market in 2001, 2002, 2003, and tracked those, and then tracked how many, X years later were they still in business. And so, but as I said in my opening comments, so there was no causal analysis, right? They didn't try to connect the dots of why some failed and why some didn't. And as Jerry and I've talked, with this, the purpose of this paper was really to kind of maybe help set the table for some additional follow-on research. And there's clearly a void in that empirical data that would help inform some of these and some of those causal relationships. I think we're running a little bit short on time, and right, I think we're, when did you want me get the hook, Jerry? All right, so why don't, I'm going to give everybody one last word, if I can, and just any kind of closing thoughts on other things you've heard that are coming down the pike, or other things that you think would be a positive contributor to the environment. And Dolly, let's start with you.
So thank you so much for having me on the panel. I'm so sorry it's the last minute, but we really appreciate the opportunity. I think one of the things that I would leave everybody with is think about what is the purpose of small business. How do we keep them viable and sustainable? Right now, it's not a sustainable strategy that we get into all these SBA programs and then we can't sustain them. We've been fortunate enough to survive this long because of different strategies, but a lot of other companies are not. So as a group, I think it's really important for us to start the dialogue with SBA about NIACS codes, about, there are very archaic NIACS codes also. For example, for online learning, there isn't thrown under education services when it should really be under computer services because they're computer software developers. Things like that I think as a group we should think about and really promote innovation, promote entrepreneurship on a sustainable basis, not on this, let me go get 49 now and then I'll get 100 next and start another business. That's not a sustainable entrepreneurial situation for anybody, for the country or for the entrepreneurs or for the job seekers even, because then the jobs keep moving. There's too much volatility in the small business community.
Again, it's a pleasure to be here, and I've really enjoyed the discussion. I agree with Dolly, and I would go one step further to say I'm all about let's simplify the rules. Let's make the rules a little simpler. I think we have too many NAICS codes. I think that's part of the problem, that you're trying to be too granular about this business, and we do have to consider how revenue changes over time. I don't think they've considered that. I'm more interested in seeing programs that truly benefit the small business community. So I do think that a lot of the programs that we have are good, but I think we need to go one step further and focus on, are we helping these companies truly be successful? And how do we define the success of a small business? Again, from a federal government standpoint, we're agnostic to this. We just want folks that can come in, do good business with us, and deliver on the solutions we want. And we do want to create opportunities for all small businesses that are out there that have an idea or a solution. And it's going to vary by agency, and it's not about keeping the incumbent all the time. It is really about the federal government being wise and smart in how it buys. But I'm in favor of programs that support small businesses and that enable small businesses to grow smartly and effectively. Thank you.
Ben, you get the last word.
Thanks. I'll put a plug for mid-tiers, so anything that helps grow the ecosystem of mid-tiers. As a small, I was super excited to be a small. I felt I was learning tremendous things. I learned a lot about the different agency missions. As a mid-tier, you have a bit of a broader view because you've learned some of those basics. Now you start to actually have real solutions. You have customers. You have missions that are very significant, and they are complex. And so I have a larger appreciation for bigger teams, for bigger mission solutions, and at the same time, I feel a little bit distracted by the survival side of that mid-tier, right? How do you succeed in all of your recompetes because now you have to go find new? How do you teach all of those little companies all the things that you've already learned? So it's a bit of a struggle. It's exciting at the same time. Any tools that maybe create some policies around multiples on NAICS codes or ability to recompete in some way that reward having saved your money, fiscally operated a company successfully so you're positioned to then be able to do acquisitions without getting penalized. So there's things that should reward the mid-tiers and also create ecosystems that incubates their success. And that's in the next stage that I'm in, so I start thinking about those types of things. So.
All right, well, thank you. I want to thank all of our panelists. Thanks so much, and thanks to you for staying awake after lunch.